Hello, Podwalkers, and welcome back to another episode of the Goblin Lore Podcast. You have just Hobbs Q with the guest today. Alex is unfortunately feeling a little under the weather and not able to join us. But before we get started, I just wanted to do a couple of quick announcements. I wanted to say thank you. This episode is sponsored again by Zencastr. If you go to zen.ai/Goblin Lore Pod, you can get 3 months off of a pro subscription, 30% off of a 3 months for a pro subscription. And why I like the pro subscription, which is what we use on this show, is it allows for kind of post production that I don't have to do. This includes auto leveling. It allows me to kind of take out pauses or gaps within the software. And, this is one of the things I've talked a lot on the show about. When I took over kind of editing, this is just nothing I had any experience with. And it was taking me hours and hours just to even get levels consistent, to get kind of that content to a place where I felt comfortable pushing out kind of the quality that we were getting before. Zencastr has really made that a lot more possible for me. And I think it's great for anybody that kind of maybe doesn't have the stronger just experience with editing. You can also record your guest on their own end, which is a huge piece because you don't have to worry about losing audio or files dropping because it will be recording on each person's end. You just send a link and they get it. We want to thank Grinding Coffee Company. So once again, we are goblins and we function and fuel ourselves predominantly off of caffeine, and Grinding Coffee Company makes that possible. They also, as we always say, are just such good partners. They're LGBT and minority owned and ran. And one of the things that they've done is they set up themselves to be a coffee company for gamers. And that comes from everything to do with their promotions, to do with the blends that they come up with. And they have allowed us to be able to do our mental health charity events and to have more giveaway options that are just not the same necessarily standard thing that everybody is giving away. So we want to say thank you to them. And then I will say I am Hobbs Q, pronouns he, him. And I'm going to introduce a returning guest, DeQuan. DeQuan, how are you doing? It's been a while since we last had you on the show.
Yeah, I don't know, was it 9 months or something? I feel like it's been a bit.
I think it's been even longer. It was actually shortly. I can speak to the fact that I know that it was shortly after George Floyd, because I think
That'd make it at least a year and a couple of months at least.
Yeah, because it was before the election. I can tell you that
For sure.
So it's been a bit. I think it's kind of funny that you said at least a couple of months because I think that's how my brain functions during pandemic times.
Yeah, everything was just a couple of months ago.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome back.
That's good to be back. Yeah, I think there's just been so much going on, and it's kind of interesting to start making the rounds with people on their projects and podcasts again as we're kind of starting to settle in a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so when we talked to you last, that was kind of, you guys have been doing the Color of MTG, and you had made a decision right before the pandemic started that you were going to move to full-time content creation. So that's now been over 2 years.
Yeah.
You and I were talking a little bit offline beforehand, but that's what you're doing.
Yeah, full time, man. And I think one of the things that's made it possible is I've been very fortunate, like I said, kind of my previous life, having run a business, know how to analyze things or whatever a little bit differently. And it's helped out a lot while I'm doing gaming content because even when we talk about the beginning of the pandemic where everybody's panicking and looking for what to do, my first thought was, okay, don't just look at what's happening, look at how behaviors are going to change. Right. So I remember having a talk with my co-host and saying, okay, we're going to lose some listens on our podcast. Yeah. And I was trying to tell other people that. And they said, well, why? I said, well, when do you listen to podcasts? When you're at the airport waiting on a plane, when you're commuting to work in your car, when you're on a train, we're not going to be doing any of those things. Right. So expect a 20-30% drop. But let's double down on things on YouTube because people are going to be at home watching Hulu, watching YouTube, watching Netflix because they can't go anywhere and do anything. Right. And I think people were just kind of like, okay, well, I'm just going to do a lot in my space, but having to understand that your space might be affected one way or the other.
Yeah.
And, even little stuff like that really went a long way to helping me out during the pandemic.
I was gonna say, we saw definitely, like you said, kind of that drop off from that, and because we do only audio, right? And that's kind of the main function. And we have found the people who have stayed are people that were kind of very loyal, the people who are very engaged with our content. It's been difficult to pick up for the type of content we do. We've had to look at ways to get kind of creative with that, even if it's just getting our name out there by doing things like charity events or kind of looking for different ways to get involved with other people's content, knowing that ours is kind of it's an audio only format. It's a podcast. It's going to be hard for us to grow. And the other thing that I saw during this was you also had everybody that now was at home and had maybe potentially some more time on their hands or weren't going as many places, weren't commuting. There was an explosion of just the number of people that decided to start doing content.
Oh, sure. And I actually planned for that as well, and understand, okay, what are you going to do that's different? Because everybody that's coming in is going to be at level one, effectively. Like, I'm going to turn a camera on or a microphone on, and I'm going to hope people show up because they don't really have a plan. They're not expecting to do this for a long time. Like, a few have thought about it, and now they're going to give it a try just because they have some extra time. But what are you going to do to be at level 2 or 3 or 4? Because those people are going to bring others, because everybody knows somebody you don't know, right? They're going to bring some number of people into your space that are going to get dropped off because you know as well as I do, like, when people do podcasts, they're lucky to make it past their fifth episode. When people start doing YouTube, a lot of them drop off after that second month. So it's like these people are going to get used to being in this habit of going and looking for stuff in that space, and then they're gone. So what are you doing to be interesting to those people? And that was a lot of what we had to consider to talk about. And even on our podcast, we said, okay, though we're going to lose some viewers or listeners, what are some topics we can talk about that are on the public consciousness, but still we can relate them to gaming? And then we had to just, I guess you'll call it, both the fortunate and unfortunate circumstance of all the stuff that went down with George Floyd and everything else, and happening to be two black guys, running a gaming podcast, right? So that was just like, well, here we go. This is the thing, and we saw that, right? And that's kind of one of the things we talked about too, because there's other Magic content creators, like the guys over at like One More Mana, uh, Thyrix6, some of these other guys, and they also saw a spike during that time. But I tried to talk to some of them and say, look, there's also going to be a drop off because it's a thing, and not to like call out anybody, but it's just everybody was in a mode where they're like, hey, you're right, I don't know the other black people in our space. So everybody's looking for that. But the minute it's off of public consciousness, it's kind of going to go back to normal. Right. So it's how do you capitalize on those moments? And I think being aware of that from business has allowed me to take advantage of a lot of that, because I was just talking to somebody the other day actually about when I had my store. If we had an abnormally successful weekend for no reason, I immediately asked my employees, okay, what caused this? Was there something going on in town? Was there a thing with the local universities? Was there a thing we didn't know about? So we could double down on it the next time it's happening. Right. Because I think too many people panic just when things are going bad. And it's like, no, I also want to know why things are going well. Right. And
What can we capitalize off of? What can we actually, kind of how do we take I talk a lot sometimes about chaos theory. And one of the things about chaos theory, there's actually a theory as it relates to jobs and to vocation, which is this idea that abnormal events happen, right? We know that they happen. We know that infrequent events happen. The key is you have to be able to capitalize on them when they do. So part of that is, am I in the right place at the right time? If I know that by going to tons of game stores, I'm going to be more likely that somebody sees a Goblin Lore sticker and maybe asks me about it. Am I doing something like that? Do I put myself into a situation where I can capitalize on an infrequent event happening? And as you're kind of saying, you have to be ready for, okay, that spike is going to happen. How are we going to keep people around? How are we going to do things? Okay, let's have, like you said, I think that idea of like, not just when things went bad, but when things went well, is there something that's repeatable? Is there something that we can build off of?
I think the best definition I've heard for luck is preparation meeting opportunity, right? You have to do everything to be ready, that for when that moment arises, you can get right into it. And I think too often people are like, I kind of hope this thing happens, or I'm aiming for this thing. And I'm like, okay, well, when it happens, what do you do with it? You know, well, it's actually, I don't know if I got to tell you about this at the time when I was last on, but I had a post go viral, which was really crazy. And this is around the time I guess they had done the first arena open, because I had because I and actually it was a little bit after the George Floyd thing, because we were trying to figure out, like, how do people get in situations where this tension or these racial issues come from? And I started thinking about how many people have a black person in a position of authority in their life growing up. So I actually thought about asking, and and truly, honestly, just thought I would ask some people on Twitter, ask some people in my Facebook groups, and then I'll just see what the responses are. But I asked, how many of you had a black teacher growing up? And if you did, what grade was it? So I just posted that. I went off to play Magic. I play my thing, which, by the way, I actually won some money. So that was cool. But then I come back and I look at my phone, and I had, like, literally, I've maxed out my responses or whatever, my notifications.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell's going on? So I go look, and I've got like 4,000 like interactions on this post on Twitter, and I'm like, "Oh god, what happened?" Right? Cuz I'm thinking, like, somebody took this the wrong way, it got shared on something, and it was the craziest thing because I literally had, like, Chelsea Clinton was responding to me. You know what I mean? Like, news reporters. I find out later they talked about it on a show on ESPN. The one where they play like the dumb game where, the talking heads respond and they get fake points or whatever.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Around the Horn, I think is what it is.
It is
No,
around
that's a
the
different
yeah, yeah.
show, but
Is it?
I think so. Either way, you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
there
yeah.
was that. It was talked. It was like some Canadian newspaper picked it up, and I'm like, this is insane, right? Even to this day, I had somebody just respond to it like 2 weeks ago. So, and it finishes. I think it has like 7,000 responses with like something like, I don't know, some insane number of views and interactions, like in the hundreds of thousands. But about that is I immediately thought, okay, this is a moment I got to jump on this, right? So I immediately started responding to as many as I could, and I might literally stayed up until like 2 in the morning, like, not even joking. And at the time I saw it, it was maybe like 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and I'm responding to as many things as I can. I'm collecting the data from both sites. I put it all together the next morning. I go to sleep late. I wake up early. I put together some information so I could make little charts and show people, like, hey, here's how many people had a black teacher in like college and junior high, whatever. Just so I'm like, I'm not going to waste the opportunity. And this actually is something people respond to. So then I was able to get more reach out of that because I now took this thing people have shown an emotional investment in, and now I can turn it into data they can use and talk about and teach people with or whatever. And that got a lot of engagements, and then that led to people following me on other things because people were just discovering that, like, oh, you do gaming content or whatever, that's cool. And yeah, so that was another big jumping off point. But I'm glad it happened to me because now I can tell other people, like, hey, here's how to manage a viral moment, where I've seen other people get that and they just post like, hey, here's my SoundCloud, whatever. And I'm like, you have 10,000 people paying attention to you, like, do more, right? You're not going to get this opportunity. Like, this is a chance you can really raise your profile.
So that's funny. I think we talked about it a little bit last time, and I was just thinking about the fact that I don't know if it was now the person that necroed your post, or if I've just seen kind of that post make the rounds as people probably saw how successful it was, and we'll see kind of that, like, I'll recycle a content that worked before, or
Oh yeah, that happens
yeah.
all the time on social media.
So I was just thinking the other day that I had seen that. But it's making me think of, like, when you sat down and decided kind of towards the beginning of all this that you were going to do content full time. Like you said, we know that with Color of MTG, the stuff that with George Floyd, and kind of just all of, I mean, the awareness that did, like you said, I remember when we had talked about it last time, that idea that people would eventually stop talking about it, right? I mean, I think that
Yeah.
that's what we knew kind of would happen. Kind of one of those things that's been frustrating to see things get brought up and then they do get put to the side. I mean, people move on. You had to be in kind of a position to capitalize off of that. But when you were sitting down and already deciding that you were going to do this full time, what were some of the things that you were planning on? What was, what was the work that you were doing to even be able to start this? Because you made that decision like right away. mean,
Yeah, well, the
you went
interesting
into
was
it head first.
I was released from my last job. I mean, they say release. I mean, release, fired, whatever. Whatever language you want to use, but I no longer had that job. Um, Back around it was the week before Thanksgiving in 2019. Right? So, I had been at that point, we had the podcast. We were maybe on like episode 6 or 8. It was still really early, and I'd maybe been streaming for maybe just a few weeks less than that, or maybe a couple weeks more. It might have been 2 months into streaming. And I had some nice severance pay. I had some money saved up, and I was like, okay, let me take a week or two to just think about this. So, no hurry. Holidays are coming up. And somewhere mid January, I feel like I had the talk with my significant other and said, look, I'm going to give this a go full time because I see a lot of gaps in the market. I see that gamers are bad at business. They just are. I mean, and I'm not saying Magic player, I mean gamers. I mean, I looked at people playing video games, people doing board game reviews, whatever. Like a lot of them are just bad at business. I said, okay,
Can you?
there's definitely room.
I'm gonna
Mhm.
just take us off this tangent right now because I want to know what you mean when you say that because it's something that I 100% believe I agree with because I've seen kind of these gaps in how people are able to market themselves. But I'm curious what you were seeing that makes like it universal that gamers seem to be bad at business.
Oh man, are you giving me permission to hijack the show? Because I could literally do this for like 5 hours.
I mean, I'm not going to give you 5 hours just because I mean I would if I had it. But I am giving you permission to hijack.
Yeah. Okay.
Like,
So I'm gonna from the most basic thing. If you, I'm trying to let me take something people can relate to. So let's just say streaming because there's a bunch of people that stream a bunch of different stuff. If you go look at the average person who starts streaming, well, one, there's I find out there's a bunch of people who because I literally research stuff all the time. I actually dedicate time every week to like watch stuff in different industries I know nothing about just to see if I can learn something for my presentation and my content that they do. So, and I can talk to that later. But one of the things is you look around and some of these people are streaming to like 5 people for 3 years, and they're doing nothing different. They're literally doing things the same on day 700 that they did on day one. And I'm like, why? You're of course you're not growing. Like something's not working, but you're not adjusting it. You're not A/B testing anything. You're not reaching out to people to figure out what you're doing wrong. There's so many things. And at the end of the day, I tell people if you're getting on doing the exact same thing that everybody else is doing, why is somebody going to watch you over someone else? Because the other person already has an audience. They're already doing it better. Their cameras are going to be better. They have a whole gimmick and probably a website and a marketing machine. Like, if you're doing the exact same thing, they're not going to come watch you. There's already 2 or 3 other people doing that. Like, you have to have your own message, your own unique value proposition. Like, if you can't tell somebody in 2 or 3 sentences why somebody should come watch you over somebody else, then you probably haven't figured out what your messaging is. So you're not going to have a focus and it's going to be hard to grow. And that's just like business 101. That's not anything special. That's not something I figured out. It's just I'm looking around and going, these people aren't doing anything. They're just sitting there, barely even engaging with their chat. They have a camera on and literally nothing. They haven't done any framing. There's no music. There's nothing special that makes them different than anyone else. And it's like, you're not gonna grow during doing that. And everything's the safest, simplest option. And it's hard to grow that way. But you see it across the board where you're looking at, like I said, it doesn't matter if people are playing video games or whatever. You go look at a game, you go look at a category, and 90% of the stuff is the same. And there's a reason all those other people are at the bottom.
I would say even just kind of outside of streaming, I'm thinking back to when we started this cast. So we're going on, we're going to hit our 4-year anniversary in June, and
Which is
as you were
huge.
saying, yeah, it's like nothing that I ever would have thought would be possible. It makes me feel awkward because I just still feel in the sense of like I don't feel like that what I do. Yeah. I have my own kind of concerns about myself that are just like not confidence at times. But part of it is just that surreality to me that I'm doing a podcast and that there are people that are still listening and that I get to do what I enjoy doing and be engaged with Magic. When we started out, the only reason that I even agreed with Joe, who started the cast, to come on was because he presented an idea to me of something that seemed very different than anything else I had heard. There seemed to be kind of he talked about this idea of where does lore meet the real world? How could we explain some lore based concept, or how do we take some real world things that are important to us, social issues, mental health, and like maybe bring it to a wider audience or bring it into a magic discussion. We'll use the lore to frame it. We'll use kind of maybe some elements that are not really related to gameplay. When he pitched it and started talking about it, all of a sudden it was like, okay, this is not something that I know of that is being done. Because I had thought numerous times about like, oh, maybe I could write articles, right? And I did, like way back in like 2010, I wrote articles on EDH. Well, it was easy then. There were, there was like five of us playing. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there wasn't me having to find a niche. In that time, that was the whole thing. Like I'd like, wow, it'd be fun to make magic content. But until Joe kind of presented an idea that then I could run with, that I felt very comfortable with, and then since he's left, Alex and I have made our own. I don't think that we would have been able to do it because I don't. We would have just been kind of three guys with a microphone in front of us talking about magic.
Well, yeah, and that's what a lot of podcasts are. Like, it's hard to listen to a podcast where they don't have a plan, the topic's not fully decided before they go on. Like, you don't know what you're tuning in for or whatever, right? And I get you as far as wanting to do something different, right? Because that was the one thing me and Brian talked about was like, okay, can we talk about different type of personal experiences, racial issues, whatever, as they affect gamers and Magic players without just being like, hey, we're going to play the race card every week, but, still bring awareness to different categories. And maybe not even just us, because we've talked about like issues for women, issues with the trans community that have come up, and we can relate it all to gaming and say, like, no, these are things that do affect you in your space. Yeah, and have some of them on as guests so they can talk about things or whatever that they may not get to on other shows because people dodge those topics. And as it turns out, it works for us, right? Like we get, I don't know, not a ton, but we get like 2,000 downloads a week, like which is strong for us. So
I mean, yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, so I mean, and we've been slowly and steadily growing it, but we only did it because we knew we could do something different. And because we even talked about says, I don't really want to do this if it's just another show, but this is a whole category that nobody is really addressing. So it's like, why don't we be the ones?
So with that, you kind of saw that. You guys were already jumping off with that. You came in though with kind of your at that point when you moved to full time, you like you said, you were doing you started with, I believe, streaming, you had YouTube.
Well, no, actually at that point I didn't even have YouTube yet. I actually started
Oh wow.
YouTubing
Okay.
February 2020 because it was just before the oh yeah, okay. So since
Right
I'm
at the
going to jump
beginning. Yeah,
topics a
yeah.
lot. I have so many things. But so we move into, like I said, January, made the decision, going to do this full time, and decided if I can make at least 70% of my bills off of just the content, I will continue doing this. Because I figured if something happened to my significant other's income, then like I have other things that I could make up the 30% pretty easy. But can I make the bulk of what we would need off of this? So I went ahead and did it. And my initial plan was actually to come at it to show the business side of gaming and magic, because obviously I'd done that in my previous life and I knew a bunch of people. So I'd already started contacting people that had some of the best game stores in the country. I started talking with people running conventions, seeing if I could get interviews with people at different places. So I'd already started lining up. I was a step away from starting to book all the plane tickets for the year because I was like, okay, got all the stuff. Like I can do cool things. I can do stuff from shows. I was getting put on lists so I could try to get badges or whatever. And then of course, end of February, mid March, it was, well, we're shutting everything down. So then it was like, well, okay. Obviously, what I wanted to do is not going to work because I can do interviews online, but I can only do so much with a Zoom call, right? I can't do walkthroughs of people's stores. I can't show what's happening on convention spaces or special meetings where people are showing off stuff. Like, that's not really going to be a thing. So I was like, okay, what can I do with this? So in the beginning, I actually used that to say, let me visit one or two stores and let's talk about how people are trying to be safer during COVID so they can still operate. So I did a couple of videos like that. I still did a couple of interviews with a couple of store owners, but it was like talking about, okay, how is this affecting your store or not? And giving people that perspective while I worked into other content. So I used that as like my kind of draw because I knew COVID awareness was going to be top of mind. But I also knew that people aren't going to want to talk about COVID 24/7, right? You're just going to get burnout. So I said, okay, people are going to be home playing Magic, playing Arena. Let me use that as my hook, and then I will still use that as a way to educate people on other things. So I moved from just doing the straight business end to, okay, let's play games. But occasionally I throw in videos like, hey, here's why you can't make as much selling your cards as other people. Here's why you don't win as often as you do. And just educating on different aspects of the game while also playing the game. And that's actually worked out great.
Yeah, as a like building off of your knowledge base as a business owner or convention runner, we talked about those last time you were kind of here. You've had these different hats that you've worn that bring you into the gaming industry, even into the content creation and content creation field, in kind
Mhm.
of a different jumping off point because of that background. Because part of what you're not as bad at business is because you've done business, and I think that that's something that most of us who do content creation have very little experience with.
Oh yeah, one of the biggest things, one of my if you follow me on socials, I have a partnership deal with Ultra Pro. And that kind of came about from like project into another project that happened to work with Ultra Pro and then I just reached out to them directly. But the first thing when I reached out to them is I basically had a two-pager that was here's what my content's about, here's what I'm aiming to do, here's what my current reach is, here are my goals. This is what I can do for you. Here's what I want from a business partner. And first response I got back from them was, we never get this type of information from anybody. And immediately we were talking about a deal within 48 hours. And that's before I had like my growth, my nothing, everything was like a quarter of what it is now,
Yeah,
right? At that point. And they were still willing to do a deal because they could see that, like, okay, this is somebody who's got their crap together. This is a person that if we do a promotional deal or something, we don't have to worry about them following up. And it's been great ever since. They've been great to me. I've done a lot of work for them, but I think too many people say, okay, I want to get a sponsor. And I'm like, okay, cool. How are you making yourself an asset to them? They're not just going to give you money for the sake of giving you money because their name's on your stuff, right? That's not good. You now, if you're it works for pro athletes because you're a pro athlete. You're on a sports team. You're on TV in front of tens of millions of people. Whatever.
yeah, yeah,
That's not going
yeah.
to work for you and me. That if we're on a good day, we get like 2,000 people watching us or watching a video we put up or something, right? That's just not the same market. But there is money to be made. As a matter of fact, one of the recent things I've been trying, and I've gotten into where I'm doing some small time consulting for people, by the way. So if you want consulting for your content on how to make it better, look me up.
Do you want to let them know where to find you, just in case? Then,
Yeah,
I mean,
everywhere on socials. You can just find me Power Dragon, POWRDRAGN on literally just about every platform.
because I was laughing because we kind of just jumped right in with our
That's okay.
and
Right.
introduced, and we didn't actually give you a chance to even say where to find you. I mean, I'll,
I'm
I'll do
totally
it
fine.
again,
I'd
but
rather show my knowledge, and if people like it, they'll find me.
okay.
They'll follow me. But yeah, one of the things I've been telling people is one of the other mistakes I think people make is, especially being a gamer. I'll use that because, most people listening to your show are going to be gamers. If I go out and reach out to, say, like Logitech that makes a ton of, or Elgato better, because I use a lot of Elgato gear for my recording and stuff. They aren't necessarily going to be in a hurry to sponsor my content because they already sponsor a ton of people in the game space, right? People that are easily 10 to 20 times larger than I am, if not more. So I don't carry as much value to them. But recently I reached out to Pane Glasses because I went looking around, because again, did my research, that there's almost no gamers I could find doing anything for eyewear. There was a
Oh,
few I found that do like the blue light blocking glasses or whatever.
that's was the one thing I would think of. Yeah.
Yeah, but I found out that Pane Glasses also offers that in normal glass frames and stuff. So great. So I reached out to them and literally wrote my proposal exactly like that. Like, hey, I use your stuff. I've ordered from your site. I think you're great. I noticed this in the game space. I would like to do a deal with you and promote because I would literally be the only person in the Magic space, probably in the entire game space, talking about regular eyewear. And it's affordable. And right now, with people not having jobs and pandemic and whatever, they're going to be looking for cheap eyeglass wear. Within a week they responded like, yes, we'd love to work with you, blah blah, let's get together, and I've already done a couple of projects for them, and we're talking about doing stuff monthly going forward. And people would look and go like, really, you reached out to an eyeglass thing? I'm like, why not? I proved to them that there's a market here, even though I'm not huge. Getting my network of, I don't know, a few 10,000 people is better than zero, and as long as it's not crazy expensive for them, they're willing to pay for it.
Right, like, if they don't have to do if you show what the utility is, you kind of tell them how you can be beneficial, um, why you once again, I think that whether we're talking sponsorships or we're talking about content creation just in general, why you is the kind of the biggest question. Um,
Always.
why should people listen? Why should somebody want to give you money or give you a discount or give you something in order to market? And even if it's not a huge payoff for them, if the return of investment is kind of like they get some eyes on in a field that they don't know, it's like
Exactly.
all upside. I mean, it's like, right?
Yeah, if you're small, they might just go, okay, we'll do a small promotion and we'll toss you $100, maybe $200. But if you and maybe say you get your whole social media reach is maybe 5,000, 10,000 people. If you can get even 20 people, 30 people to go order from their website, they're going to get their money back and then some, because those people are probably going to become future return customers, at least half of them. So that's worth paying you a couple $100 that you wouldn't have had before. And the thing is, if they say no, you're just out the time it took to put together an email to them. It's all upside.
Well, I am guessing based on kind of the work we've talked before, the amount of time and effort you're willing to put into this business. This is your job, right? This is the same thing as if you
Absolutely.
were doing a 9 to 5. You may have different hours. You are still putting in those hours every single week. It's not just kind of a, yeah, I'll make sure I have a regular streaming time. It's everything that you're doing outside of that. Part of that is you're going to get better at writing those business letters once they're written. So as you're saying, like the first couple of times, you're going to have to put all that time, effort, get that data, get all of that pulled. But it's like, it's easy then like you're saying, the cost is an email. If it doesn't go well, okay, I look a different avenue if I need to go that route.
Oh
Because
yeah, even now it's easier now because now I have a media kit. It's just a 3 pager I can just send to them that shows all my stats on all my socials, talks about my background, what I'm available for, and then it shows all the brands I've worked with.
what I was thinking is I've seen people that have really tried to move to doing content creation full time. I mean, I know people who have been successful. I know people that it's been a lot of work with, and hearing about things like media kits, hearing about things like having a mission statement in some ways, or just what your actually business does, who you are, seems to be one of those areas that maybe gamers could improve upon.
Here's the thing I'm going to tell people that's going to make it way easy for them, and it's going to be the opposite of everything you've been told in life. Which, by the way, our adult lives just prove that our childhoods were lies. Like they
Completely.
tell you, don't get in car with strangers, but then we call an Uber. Like don't talk too much in class, but people pay me to talk now. So it's like you know things change. We're living a different life. But one of the biggest things is, and this is hard, and I've told this to entrepreneurs, business owners, well before I was doing content, is you can't afford to be humble when working for yourself. And that's exactly what you're doing when you're making content. Like you have to be willing to talk about yourself. You have to be willing to put yourself out there to companies. You have to be active on social media. You have to go to events. You have to engage people. If that is not what you are willing to do, this is not for you. You're going to be miserable. You're going to have to work 10 times as hard as everybody else. Like, can you do it? Yes, but it is going to be a rough, worse journey for you if you're not willing to accept that. Because just like with the business, and this is what I ask business owners, why should somebody come to your business, or in this case of making content, come view you over somebody else? You're either doing something that you believe is not being presented, offered, sold, whatever in your market, or you're doing something more entertaining or different or better than what's out there. If you don't believe one of those two things, then you probably shouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Or if you haven't even thought of this, I mean, I think that's the other area. That you don't know what you don't know. I'm hoping that people maybe, if you're looking at going this route too, DeQuan is just offering kind of these like ballpark things of like you may not even be aware that that is something that you need to be thinking of. That's a sign, right? Like there's a
Oh,
lot that
absolutely.
goes into just the forethought that I think people miss.
Yeah, and this is the stuff like I give it sounds kind of pompous, but like this is the stuff I just give to people for free. Like after that, we niche down. If I'm doing consulting for people, it's like, hey, all right, let's talk about specifics of you and your specific content. But this is like level one stuff that I'll kind of like ask people beforehand of like, have you thought about all these things? So we can just talk about that going in because that makes a difference.
Yeah, if you haven't considered this at all, you're as a consultant are starting at a very different spot.
Because if you tell me, okay, I'm in my content for the sake of just being entertaining. I want to be funny. Whatever. Okay, cool. We'll talk about how can you integrate weird looks, hats, makeup, maybe music or whatever, right? To make your stuff different to meet that goal. That isn't for me, right? I'm very much a very chill, laid back, just matter of fact kind of person. I have fun, but I'm not an over the top character. That's not what I'm selling, right? I'm selling a chill mood, lots of information, almost an educator level thing. So I know that, right? So what I would do for some of my content is not what I would necessarily recommend for somebody else. And different things will work exceptionally well for different people. So that's why sometimes copying people can be really bad because there's a reason sometimes that works for one person, not for another. Like an example, I would say for Magic, if you watch arena content online and you watch somebody like, actually, I'll use three examples myself, Covert Go Blue, and Legend VD, right? Covert Go Blue is very much, he enjoys playing the role of the anti hero, right? He plays up that pseudo bad guy role a little bit or whatever. And his audience is into that, right? Like that doesn't really work for me. I've kind of become the educator sort of good guy. So I can't just play that kind of pseudo snarky role or whatever. Not that he's a bad person. I mean, he's on my stream team. He's a good dude. But that's just kind of the person he plays on camera. Whereas LVD doesn't even use a camera at all and is all voice and very matter of fact and whatever, but he's got a pretty good radio voice and it works for his content. For me, I have to be on camera because one, I make faces and make fun of myself or whatever sometimes, and seeing that visual helps, but also being a visual representation of a black person in the gaming space is important, right? So
Yeah.
each of us has something different that we're using to our advantage to sell our content, even though we're all in the same space. But what each of us does, I wouldn't recommend the other one's copy because it just wouldn't work for them or their audiences. Even to a point of how we film stuff, I tell people I purposely open and close my content on my daily gameplay videos with me being full screen. So people get used to having a conversation with a black person, which I know in the game space, there's not a lot of us. So you make that more of a normal thing that people get used to, right? That's actually something very intentional about how I present my content. And I'm always adding little intentional things that are nothing I ever call out, but it's all purposeful by design.
You make me feel bad. I was gonna just go buy a yellow hat and assume that that was gonna, get me Gabriel in Nassif type numbers.
But you know what? If you played up the man in the yellow hat in like Curious George, that could be kind of funny.
It probably would be, but I don't have the playing skill. I'd have once again, I would have to be going a very different direction for that.
But you know what? That's the other thing, right? There's people who are known, like you're saying, like Gabriel Nassif or even Paulo Vitor and some of these guys that do content that are known for being very good players. So they don't have to have as much of a personality. Not saying like Paulo actually does have a lot of personality, but the thing is, they're not marketing a personality, they're marketing their skill, right? So if you're not at that level, people aren't going to tune in just to watch you play, right? I make mistakes all the time, but that's not what I'm selling. I'm selling, hey, look, I'm going to show you a new deck or a different idea or something in the format that you may not have thought of, a deck maybe you thought was bad, but here's a different way to play it, right? I'm showcasing ideas and teaching people how to be better more than just saying, hey, I'm going to play this deck you know is good and I'm going to show you the best way to play it.
Yeah, yeah, you're not technical know-how and how to run through very just like very strong smart play in the
Yeah.
same sense is not what you're this is how you're going to win a tournament. This is what you need to be doing in prep for that.
And that applies to every game, mind you. Like if you're a League of Legends player, you're a I don't know, CS:GO player, whatever, same thing. Some people will get a lot of views because they are known as being one of the best at the thing they do. Others are going to be terrible at the game, but people are going to have a good time hanging out with them and watching them play, watching them get blown up and freak out over things or whatever. And that's how they're going to market themselves. And both can be equally successful.
And that's our show for today. You can find the host on Twitter. HobbsQ can be found at HobbsQ, and Alex Newman can be found at Mel_chronicler. Send any questions, comments, thoughts, hopes, and dreams to @Goblin Lore Pod on Twitter, or email us at goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. If you want to support your friendly neighborhood gobslugs, the cast can be found at patreon.com/goblinlorepod. Opening and closing music by Vindergotten, who can be found on Twitter at Vindergotten or online at vindergotten.bandcamp.com. Logo art by Steven Raphael, who can be found on Twitter at Steve Raphael. Goblin Lore is proud to be presented by Hipsters of the Coast as part of their growing Vorthos content, as well as magic content of all kinds. Check them out on Twitter at HipstersMTG or online at hipstersofthecoast.com. Thank you all for listening, and remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.